A very good morning. Welcome to Daybreak Australia. I'm Haidi Stroud-Watts in Sydney. We're counting down to Asia's major market opens.
Good evening from Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York. I'm Vonnie Quinn. The top stories this hour. Treasuries fall ahead of Thursday's U.S. inflation data as investors await fresh clues on the Fed's outlook. New York Fed President John Williams saying rates are now sufficiently restrictive.
Also ahead, the SEC giving the green light to spot Bitcoin ETFs over a decade after the first proposal. We'll be speaking with the SEC Commissioner, Hester Peirce.
And I'm Sharon live at CES in Las Vegas, where we'll be speaking to Chinese EV maker Xpeng about global demand, especially in China, not to mention about their new flying cars.
Let's get a quick check on Wall Street. Small moves for most of the session, although John Williams' comments did give a tailwind to stocks towards the end of the session. He spoke about 45 minutes before the close, and as you can see, the S&P 500 ended the session up 0.6%, the Nasdaq up 0.7%. He said policy is tight enough to nudge inflation down, but policymakers need more evidence before they can dial back interest rates. CPI Thursday in the United States, though, is what investors are watching. That and, of course, the Bitcoin ETF approval process, which is now done. Gary Gensler, the SEC, coming out saying that this is not an endorsement of Bitcoin, nor is it an endorsement of crypto exchanges. And Bitcoin itself holding on to some gains, trading just above $46,000 a coin. No massive moves, though. So let's get straight to that story. Annabelle Droulers is joining us with the latest in Hong Kong. And Annabelle, tell us a little bit more about the approvals and what actually happened in the last hour.
Yeah, really landmark decision, something that's as well seen as really a watershed moment for the crypto industry as a whole, because it could really start to bring a lot more institutional investors into the digital asset space. At a headline level, essentially 11 ETFs have now got the go-ahead here. And as you said, a decade in the making, because it was actually the Winklevoss twins, Cameron and Tyler, who first applied for a spot Bitcoin ETF back in 2013. But it's taken until now for the SEC to give their blessing for this sort of structure. Of course, there's some heavyweights, and it was really the entrance of BlackRock at the end of last year, others Fidelity, VanEck, Valkyrie, but BlackRock in particular that started to tell us perhaps this could be something that would end up being an eventuality. So, as I said, more than a dozen, and you can see some of these here, it has been that real race to the bottom on their fee structure, but they'll start trading Thursday. A really big test for the industry, for ETF issuers overall, because this is actually something we have never seen, at least from the research of Bloomberg Intelligence, this many ETFs for the same product going to market in the same day. It's most likely about trying to remove that first mover advantage, but still something that's going to be a really big test for the crypto industry as a whole and for ETF issuers.
And as you say, this is a landmark decision on so many ways, not least of which is also the fact that we very rarely see this kind of capitulation on a decision from the SEC, right? What were some of the factors that resulted in where we land today?
Yeah, absolutely, Heidi. We know that the SEC under Chair Gary Gensler has been pretty much relentlessly anti-crypto for a significant period here, but it does seem, or what Gensler said in a statement, that it was the Grayscale court decision last year that prompted the approvals. Now, Grayscale Investments, they're a crypto asset manager. They're one of the biggest in the market. And at a headline level, they applied to convert their Bitcoin trust into an ETF. Now, the SEC rejected that decision. A federal appeals court last year overturned that decision from the SEC because they said that the commission failed to explain its different treatment of similar products. A lot of details in that, but what it tells you was that it was a really stinging rebuke for Gary Gensler in particular, and the way that he had approached the crypto industry. Now he's saying that was actually behind the reason to appeal these ETFs. It doesn't mean that he's really shifted his stance in any meaningful way on the crypto industry at all. In fact, he's still saying that investors should be cautious on crypto. He just says that spot Bitcoin ETFs will bring more oversight to the industry as a whole. He's still saying that a lot of crypto exchanges are shirking their responsibilities, and that this SEC action on spot Bitcoin ETFs does not imply that they've approved crypto exchanges. So, Heidi, yes, some progress for digital asset as a whole, but it does seem that there's still that pushback on the crypto exchanges in particular. Still, though, ETFs a very big decision, and as we said, more than a decade in the making.
And of course, we don't really know how it's going to affect the price of Bitcoin or demand for Bitcoin, and lots of other factors will be factored into that this year as well, with the halving and so on, Annabelle. But one of the things is that now sell-side research firms will be able to put out notes and recommendations and buy, hold, sell ratings. Have we seen any of those so far?
Not as yet on that front, but to my knowledge, but it is certainly something that's going to be very interesting from an institutional basis, because this is really about something that could prompt a lot more inflows, and it really legitimizes the asset class to an extent. Of course, the crypto industry, it's in Bitcoin in particular, even though it is actually the largest of the digital asset tokens and making up more than half of the market cap, it's still a very, very, very small piece of the investment landscape. And so I think a lot of investors, at least on Wall Street, will continue to see this as just one of the many alternative asset investments that can be added to portfolios. Of course, there's the argument that having spot Bitcoin ETFs could actually detract to an extent, because investors won't go to crypto exchanges anymore. Possibly they could just look to invest through the spot Bitcoin ETFs instead. But it'll be really interesting to watch, of course, overall what sort of inflows we see into the space. You mentioned, of course, the moves that we're seeing in Bitcoin today. Not really notable at all, but at the same time, a lot of this activity had already been priced in, and it really kicked off with that BlackRock application for a spot Bitcoin ETF at the end of last year, which told us that perhaps the SEC could finally shift its stance on this product.
What a whirlwind it has been, not least of which was the false start that we had yesterday, right? Annabelle there in Hong Kong with the latest. And we'll be getting more insights. An interview with the US SEC Commissioner Hester Peirce is coming up in the next few minutes. We'll be hearing more when it comes to the thinking behind that Bitcoin ETF decision after more than a decade. Let's take a look at how the rest of our markets are shaping up as we head into the start of trading in this Asia session on Thursday. Sydney futures are looking pretty muted, about 0.2% higher. We have seen quite a bit of a pullback when it comes to a lot of those China-related, mining, commodities-related plays, right? Iron ore has been underperforming now for about 5 days after what has really been a significant run up, and that's of course benefited a lot of the big miners and really driven a big part of that rally in here when it comes to trading in Australia. We're seeing a little bit more weakness in that space now. The Aussie dollar is pretty flat at the moment, 66.97. We had the CPI numbers, and we'll be waiting to get more of those inflation numbers for December, as well as the quarterly numbers, but November's reading showing that sharper than expected slowdown in inflation, suggesting that potentially the RBA is well and truly done. Kiwi stocks are off by about 0.1%, and dollar yen trading at 145.64 at the moment. We've seen sort of, when it comes to the treasuries and JGB space, US bond markets really trimming those bets on treasuries ahead of CPI. We'll take a look at how that plays out across Japanese assets today as well. The Kiwi dollar also seeing a little bit of trading on the back foot. And of course, Vonnie, we're also getting the Bank of Korea decision today. That's the first central bank decision here in Asia of 2024. That job market data potentially a little bit better than what the headline unemployment shows, but certainly that will weigh into the BOK's thinking in just a couple of hours' time.
Exactly. Economists looking for the BOK to remain at 3.5%, so unchanged. Meanwhile, in U.S. central banking, New York Fed President John Williams said monetary policy is now tight enough to guide inflation back to the Fed's target. But he also suggested policymakers need more evidence of cooling inflation before cutting interest rates. Have a listen.
My base case is that the current restrictive stance in monetary policy will continue to restore balance and bring inflation back to our 2% longer run goal. I'll expect that we will need to maintain a restrictive stance of policy for some time to fully achieve our goals, and it will only be appropriate to dial back the degree of policy restraint when we're confident that inflation is moving toward 2% on a sustained basis.
Let's get more perspective now on the markets with Grace Lee, portfolio manager at Columbia Threadneedle. Grace, did John Williams forward the debate at all? He's obviously one of the top 2 or 3 that we listen to at the Fed.
Well, thanks for having me. I think he came in line with what we were expecting. I think it's pretty clear that the Fed is done raising rates, but he didn't really give a signal as to when they might want to bring rates down. And I know a lot of people have been expecting something as early as March, but that seems it seems like it's right around the corner, and we haven't seen the data that would support that type of weakening that would call for a reduction in rates so quickly.
What would we need to see in the Thursday session, for example, on inflation? Because we are looking for inflation to rise a little bit, to quicken once again for the month's data. We're looking for an annual pace of 3.2% and ex-food and energy 3.8%.
So I think the numbers that come out tomorrow, it's probably going to be in a range that is, again, probably not super decisive in terms of we must tighten or we must loosen. I think we've been in a range and slowly slowing down the economy, but nothing dire in either case in terms of reheating substantially or cooling off a lot.
If that's the case, Grace, do you have concerns about the U.S. economy this year? Or are you quite happy with a soft landing scenario?
Well, I think the soft landing seems to be where we're heading, although I think, obviously we've had very low unemployment rates, so that certainly supports that soft landing scenario. On the other hand, and that inflation has been coming down for the most part. And on the other hand, there are still geopolitical risks. There's a presidential election ahead. There's certainly other forces at hand, but in general, I think a soft landing is probably where we see things going.
So if you're trying to get a nice return in 2024, how do you preemptively trade that then? What are you doing with your portfolios in order to try and take advantage of what you think seems to be a soft landing scenario playing out?
Well, I think we have to realize that, we like to look at the underperforming sectors, and as much as 2023 had very strong returns for the S&P 500 overall, there are many sectors that were left behind, and entire swaths of the market did not participate. And so those are the sectors that we're looking at, and especially against a backdrop of non-zero rates, which I think is something that we forget about, being so focused on the next 25 basis points. But, again, if you look at the last 10, 12 years pre-pandemic, we were in a zero rate environment, and that was a very different scenario than I think what we're going to feel for the next several years. And I think positioning for that, we're really looking for opportunities that haven't participated the last year, opportunities where rates leveling off and possibly coming down in the near term will help relieve the pressure. And those are sectors like healthcare, utilities, financials, maybe not some of the most exciting sectors like technology, but we think that there's ground to be made up there.
Grace, I have to ask you how many questions you're getting about Bitcoin and crypto assets generally now that we have the news that we have accelerated approval and, as many as 11 ETFs could be trading by the end of the week.
Well, so, I think Bitcoin and is certainly an interesting topic for a lot of people. I personally have not been getting a lot of questions, given that I focus on more value and income sectors. But we do realize that this is a hot topic, and it will probably take some attention. I think the SEC's approval of the ETFs today probably helps to legitimize it as an asset class. And, I'd expect that there will be more excitement about that going forward. And it probably has, we'll probably see baby steps initially because it's only been a little over a year since we've had certain scandals involving Bitcoin. So I think it'll take some time, but it's certainly an asset class to watch.
Grace, thank you so much for your time today. Much appreciated. That is Grace Lee, Portfolio Manager at Columbia Threadneedle. Still ahead, oil prices slip in a choppy session as traders balance a surprise buildup in U.S. stockpiles with threats in the Red Sea. Plus, the Biden administration backing legislation that would let the U.S. seize billions in frozen Russian assets. Details next. This is Bloomberg. You're watching Daybreak Australia. Some top stories we're tracking around the world. The US and its allies are weighing options for retaliation against escalating attacks in the Red Sea by Houthi militants. The Iran-backed group launched their largest missile and drone attack to date on ships Tuesday. The White House has been considering military strikes on Houthi targets in Yemen, despite the risk of a regional escalation.
If these attacks continue, as they did yesterday, there will be consequences. Again, this represents a clear threat to the interests of countries around the world, and it's important that the international community come together and respond to them.
Ecuadorian President Daniel Noboa says he has received a pledge of aid from the United States as the country reels from violence. A state of emergency has been declared after a crackdown on drug trafficking triggered a war between gangs and the Ecuadorian state. Earlier this week, gangsters stormed a TV station during a live broadcast. They were later arrested by police. Senior China diplomat Liu Jianchao discussed U.S. relations with former officials and business leaders in New York. According to a statement, he met with Bridgewater founder Ray Dalio, as well as former U.S. Treasury Secretaries Robert Rubin and Timothy Geithner. Talks were focused on how to promote trust and reduce suspicion between the United States and China.
All right, take a look at how we're trading so far early in the Asian session when it comes to FX. We're seeing the Aussie dollar actually swinging to positive territory, 67, just above that 67 level. Of course, we've seen a bit of sort of profit taking or a little bit of a pullback when it comes to the Aussie, given the big run up from late October. We've seen about 10% being put on by the Aussie, and a lot of that has been driven over, some would say, surprising enthusiasm over the Chinese economic recovery and some of the policy signalling that has really driven, in particularly, some of these industrial metals and commodities like iron ore higher. And that's obviously a big proxy for trading in the Aussie dollar. The Kiwi is also largely unchanged at the moment. We're watching the dollar yen as well. 145.66 is where we're at, with the yen risking really a little bit more pain when it comes to the potential for a US CPI surprise. That is, of course, the big inflation print that we're looking to for the rest of the week. The yen really potentially looking at that 150 against the dollar level, depending on if we start to see signs that US inflation has started to accelerate again. We've got a confluence of factors really, shifting financial conditions, a re-emergence of yen carry trades, and some of the recent gains in oil as well, which is, of course, a Japanese import, has seen the yen trading really on its heels this week. Vonnie.
I wanted to point out, Heidi, that Bitcoin is trading up 0.9% now, really bouncing around. It held on to gains and then lost those gains, and now it's back up again. And some other after-hours trading, Coinbase, which is one of the exchanges that'll be a custodian, that's up 1.3% after hours, in spite of the SEC chair saying that he doesn't approve of exchanges. Up next, we're going to hear from SEC Commissioner Hester Peirce on the approval of the proposals. We'll now bring you to that interview in progress with SEC Commissioner Hester Peirce. That's on Balance of Power. Have a listen.
This saga, I know there's still pieces of it to go, but I think this is a big milestone.
Well, it's a milestone certainly for these Bitcoin products, but it also raises a question of what sort of precedent this sets. If you look at the statement from the chairman, Gary Gensler, he was very specific that this is specific to these Bitcoin products, which are non-security commodities. And there is a question of what this could mean in the future for essentially everything else. Is that door completely closed?
The chair is right to point out that this is specific to a particular set of products. But obviously precedent matters. And so you look at the reasoning, and people will do this. They'll look at the reasoning in the order, and they'll seek to apply it to other facts and circumstances as appropriate. So I think the only thing I will say is that one of my complaints in this area has been that we haven't always stuck with precedent when it comes to these kinds of exchange-traded products. We haven't necessarily applied the same standards that we do with respect to other kinds of exchange-traded products, but it is a precedent people will point to.
That's the question, of course, we're all asking, whether it opens the door for other ETFs backed by other cryptocurrencies. Commissioner, is that in our near future?
Again, every application has to be considered on its facts and circumstances. But one of the things that I think that we have to acknowledge is that when we apply a particular rationale to one particular product, people will ask us to apply it to other products as well.
Well, and there also is the question, Commissioner, of just the use of these products once they do begin trading as expected tomorrow. What kind of fiduciary responsibilities are there for investment advisors for their clients before allowing them to put money into these products?
It's like anything else. A fiduciary is supposed to look out for the interests of the investors that she's working with. And that means taking into account the specific circumstances of that investor, the risk tolerance, the other elements of that investor's portfolio. And so it's not a cookie cutter answer one way or the other. Fiduciaries are paid to make good decisions that are appropriate for that particular investor.
There were a few moments yesterday when we thought this had been approved a day earlier, Commissioner. As you well know, everything worked out with the Twitter account at the SEC?
Well, it is. I mean, there was a statement, I think, that came out saying that we are going to be looking into this and working with law enforcement authorities to figure out how this happened, how yesterday's event happened, and I hope that we get to the bottom of it, and I hope that we're as transparent when we explain what happened as we expect the companies that we regulate to be when they experience a similar event.
Well, that certainly has gotten the attention of many on Capitol Hill, Commissioner. There have been many congressional Republicans who have made their opinions known about the SEC under this chair for some time now, who have called a lot of attention to yesterday's events. I'd also point to a statement that we got out from that House Financial Services Committee after this. They maintain that while legislation to provide clarity and certainty for digital assets remain necessary, the steps taken today are a significant improvement over what they call the SEC's track record of regulation by enforcement. Until that legislation exists, even with these approvals aside, should we expect that regulation by enforcement to continue?
Well, I haven't seen much progress on us as a regulator setting out clear rules of the road when it comes to crypto products and services. And I think that that's been a complaint that I've had. It's been a complaint that others have had. We could, just as we changed our tune here, we could change our tune on that. And so I remain hopeful that we will. That said, Congress has expressed an interest in legislating in this area, and I look forward to seeing their work in this area. And they have a clear interest in figuring out which regulators should have authority in this area. And I look forward to seeing what comes of that.
As do we, Commissioner, as do we. Obviously, while we're waiting for that, a lot will just depend on the actions of the Securities and Exchange Commission. And in addition to a lot of these enforcement actions, if you will, there are also just questions around fraud and manipulation. The argument initially about what Chair Gensler was so concerned with about these products in the first place, spot products specifically compared to futures. Obviously, a court has ruled that distinction was arbitrary and capricious. But do you share any concern now that these products are approved? The deed is done. These things are going to trading, especially in light of the instance we saw yesterday in which prices moved on false information. Do you think that more investors, institutional or otherwise, now could fall into something potentially here that could be damaging, given how volatile this market has proven to be and how potentially easily it can move?
If people put out false information about a traditional security, a traditional company, the stock of that company the price can also move. So this is not unique to Bitcoin or Bitcoin exchange traded products. Obviously, we will continue to look at the markets and at the markets for these Bitcoin exchange traded products specifically. And if there is bad activity, and it's within the ETP marketplace, we have authority there to investigate and bring enforcement actions as needed.
Our thanks to SEC Commissioner Hester Peirce. Thank you for the insights today on Bloomberg. And another important breaking story, another big one that's hitting this.
And that was Joe Matthew of Balance of Power speaking with SEC Commissioner Hester Peirce. And we just want to point out that Bitcoin is trading after hours as it does. It trades all day, 24/7. It is now trading up about 1% at 46,400 a coin. Turning to oil trading now, another choppy session for Brent and New York traded crude futures. A surprise build-up in U.S. oil inventories offsetting the latest concerns about new Houthi attacks in the Red Sea. Bloomberg's Sue Keenan joins us now. And Sue, it was a pretty big swing in price.
Yeah, in both New York and London trading sessions, we saw swings of about 3% lower and then higher as these two forces, the concerns about oversupply and concerns about attacks by Houthi rebels, again played on the market. In the latest trading, bearish sentiment won out after U.S. inventory surged by a surprising 1.3 million barrels last week. That is the biggest increase since mid-December. Inventories in the Cushing storage hub in the U.S., which is more closely watched by traders, actually rose, and that was a slightly had a drawdown, and that's a slightly bullish signal. But again, it was the bearish factors that won out. If you drop into the Bloomberg, you'll notice that Brent crude has been facing additionally bearish technical indicators, and the head of Asia trading at the trading giant Vidal Group is predicting that markets will be relatively balanced this year versus demand struggles, and that is as it keeps pace with the new surging supply we've seen outside the OPEC cartel, surging supplies from the U.S., for instance. A further indication of why we're seeing big swings has to do, again, with the latest attacks by those Houthi rebels in the Red Sea area that boosted oil prices by as much as 2% intraday before the downturn, and it continues to boost the rates of the world's biggest shipping companies, which are detouring for the most part on much more costly routes of about $1 million a trip for these companies, as the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken continues to say that the U.S. and allies are considering taking serious action against the rebels.
So meanwhile, an oil industry trade group is warning that the Biden administration's oil policies could, they say, threaten the next energy crisis.
Yeah, this is the American Petroleum Institute, or API. It's widely known as the largest industry group for oil, gas pipeline, and supply companies. They held their annual gathering in Washington, D.C., and took aim at the Biden administration's oil policy. The group giving a sobering outlook in terms of their current view that the Biden policies could jeopardize the country's energy might, as oil and gas production is currently booming. Now, the group is concerned that climate change and climate change activists, as well as other conflicts around the globe, have heightened tensions over fossil fuel supplies. They believe Biden is under growing pressure to block oil and gas projects. They're seeking the opposite, swifter approval of certain projects. The group, again, warning that possible changes could chill development and furtherance of the U.S. oil industry. Back to you.
Bloomberg's Sue Keenan there with the latest on oil. And the U.S. has become the world's top exporter of liquefied natural gas, overtaking Australia and Qatar. U.S. shipments rose last year after the restart of a Texas LNG facility that was closed in June 2022 by a fire and explosion. Qatar saw its volume shrink 1.9%, dropping it from the top of the list to third place, and Australia came in at second with exports that were little changed from 2022. U.S. exports are set to rise further this year with 2 new LNG projects due to start production, Vonnie.
Well, Heidi, Ford's South Korean electric car battery partner, SK On, expects EV sales to be sluggish in 2024, but they remain bullish in the longer term. Chief Commercial Officer Sung Min-suk spoke to Sherian at CES in Las Vegas about navigating market fluctuations.
Well, this year, going forward for 24, we think it's going to stay around for a while. But then long run, as you know, our goal through the end of the year or end of the decade it remains strong and it remains in line of our plan.
In order to get to the end of the decade, would you consider adjusting production levels given the demand levels right now?
Well, that's given in the automotive industry. I mean, the battery wasn't so much automotive yet, but then it's becoming more integral part of automotive business. And we just need to be flexible relative to the market situation for the time being. But long run, it's no doubt that we will reach the goal that we're planning on.
Flexibility includes production cuts, possibly.
Not cuts. I mean, we manage our production schedule relative to the OEM orders.
Some geopolitical challenges that we've already seen as well. China restricting some of those critical minerals that need to be put into EV batteries. What are your expectations for how that will affect your business?
Well, it's obviously a challenge, but then, us as a business, we always manage different policies and regulations around the world. So it's nothing new. We just need to find the better ways to qualify our products to each respective regulations. So when it comes to IRA, we have obviously started our plans before COVID, and then we ramped it up right through COVID, and then now we were running at full capacity. And then IRA is definitely helpful for our business. And then obviously a new regulation called FEOC is a challenge, but then we will definitely manage it through as well.
Xpeng President and CCO Sung Min Suk there. Let's get back to Vegas now at CES, where Chinese EV maker Xpeng has unveiled its modular flying car. It would be available to pre-order later this year, with delivery to individual users to start in the fourth quarter of 2025. And our Daybreak co-anchor Sherry Ann is standing by. And Sherry, fully expect that I want to see you in that flying car.
Yeah, I mean, the stuff of fiction is coming to Las Vegas, and really we are seeing more and more models of flying cars. It's becoming a little bit of a crowded market, but let's discuss all of this with EV maker Xpeng CEO Brian Gu, who's joining me here. It's great to see you here at CES. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
You have a couple of models of flying cars, right? But what I'm curious about is you're an EV maker, so how does that really fit into your growth strategy?
Well, Xpeng has always prided ourselves to be the explorer of future mobility. And we don't think the mobility is only stops at the making EVs. We actually want to see the future mobility involve not just two-dimensional, but three-dimensional travel. And low-altitude flying actually is also, I think, as the next big frontier for human mobility. On top of that, because our strength in EV, we actually have technology in powertrain, in autonomous driving, smart cabin technologies, as well as other engineering and manufacturing know-how that actually can be very synergistic of making also flying car a reality. So that's why we're actually into this sector.
Because you've had a little bit of a tough time when it comes to EV sales themselves in 2023 and 2022 as well, right? As the broader market has weakened a little bit. So are you expecting this to eventually add to your bottom line? And how long would that actually take?
Well, the flying car project will take a couple more years to become a real product. That's why we're demoing the design at CES today. However, for the electric vehicle market, it's actually growing quite robustly, both in China as well as globally. We're actually seeing our sales grow last year about 17% year-on-year growth. But also we're seeing encouraging sign of further growth this year with additional models going to launch.
I know that you don't necessarily give the sales forecast, but what are we thinking of about right now? Same levels as 2023, a little bit more, better? How long will this recovery take?
Well, for 2024, we actually anticipate much faster growth than we experienced the last couple of years. And also because we are launching more products this year than what we launched in the previous years, we actually think the growth rate will be outpacing the industry, leading to market share growth as well.
It's been really interesting to see how the Chinese EV market has developed, with even BYD taking over Tesla when it comes to the top-selling EV maker. How do you compete against not only these foreign names, but your own domestic domestic brands?
Well, Xpeng, I think, is quite unique because we're, first of all, technology focused. If you look at the product that we launched, we boast top-the-line autonomous driving capabilities. For example, in China, we have launched NGP for city urban driving scenarios across over 240 cities, which actually is the first in China.
When it comes to assisted driving tech, I think you were also trying to launch in Europe this year. Is that still happening?
Well, we aim to launch some portion of our XNGP capability in Europe by the end of this year, early next year.
We do have a few issues when it comes to the EU, right? Especially with the anti-subsidy probes on EV makers as well. How's that impacting Xpeng?
Well, I think we're also following the development closely, just like any other OEMs. But I think it is normal, when markets adopt certain policies as an OEM, you just have to adapt to it. So I think we will be monitoring closely and see what the policy ultimately will evolve to, and we'll respond accordingly.
Do you see geopolitics between China, the US, Europe improving in 2024? And what's your base case scenario of how that could affect the business landscape for EV makers like yourself?
Well, I think we're operating in a very complex operating environment, both from a geopolitical perspective as well as from industry dynamic perspective. It is a very, I would say, dynamic, and I think as a company, you just have to be very nimble to address any potential issues or strategy changes you have to do. So I think that's something I would say it's part of the business today for our global environment.
What about economic challenges? Because Europe's economy hasn't been doing that great. Do you expect it to improve, and what will that mean for sales there?
Well, I think Europe is a key market for us to expand to this year. We still see very significant growth opportunities for EV in the European market, despite overall, I think, economic potential challenges. And also we see other growth markets outside of Europe, for example, Middle East and Southeast Asia. Those are also markets that we see tremendous growth opportunity to. So in whole, I think for us, global opportunities outside of China represent a very large and also very new and fast-growing opportunity for us.
North America?
Well, I think North America, we also monitoring. It's a very big market, but I think we need to be probably more prepared because it's a very difficult market to enter for newcomers. So we need to make sure that we have the relative strength and brand and others ready to enter the U.S.
Do you have a timeline for when you would like to do that?
Well, I think we don't have a timeline today, but clearly that's a large opportunity we have to spend our time monitoring.
You seem very optimistic when it comes to the Chinese market, but the headlines haven't really been that great, especially when it comes to economic recovery and consumption actually recovering. Do you think that will change?
Well, I think last year we saw and after COVID, there's certain parts of the Chinese economy I think is still faced with lackluster performance. But I think overall there's still huge growth potential, and also there's a lot of vitality in the Chinese economy, and also coupled with that, the transition from traditional ICE to new energy era is still unstoppable. So I think we're still very hopeful. It will bring a lot of growth opportunities for us.
Brian, good to have you here and really meeting you in person at CES in Las Vegas. That was the CEO of Xpeng, Vonnie.
Thank you.
Sherry, thank you so much. We'll be back with you later. Watch us live and see our past interviews on our interactive TV function, TV Go. There you can also dive into any of the securities or Bloomberg functions that we talk about. Plus, become part of the conversation by sending us instant messages during our shows. This is for terminal subscribers only. Check it all out at TV Go. This is Bloomberg.
There was a statement, I think, that came out saying that we are going to be looking into this and working with law enforcement authorities to figure out how this happened, how yesterday's event happened, and I hope that we get to the bottom of it, and I hope that we're as transparent when we
To take a look at how Bitcoin and some of the other crypto assets are performing at the moment. We've seen Bitcoin kind of holding on to pretty muted gains of really just about 1% after the SEC approval of spot ETFs after what has been just a long journey. This is the immediate aftermath of that Wednesday decision by the US Securities and Exchange Commission to approve ETFs directly investing in the token. It really is seen as a milestone. It hasn't been the easiest path to get here. It's been over 10 years. And we are now starting to see the release of a bit more details when it comes to that final Bitcoin ETF vote tally on the SEC website. SEC's two Democrats, besides from Gary Gensler, voted against the Bitcoin ETF. SEC Chair Gary Gensler voted with GOP commissioners on that Bitcoin ETF there. So we are continuing to kind of watch for the broader impact across the asset class. Broadly speaking, we're seeing a bit of upside here, but really a fluctuating session. Some of those earlier gains have been paired and potentially we could see kind of a bit more further pressure despite that SEC approval. Let's stick with crypto for morning calls, bring Annabelle in Hong Kong. So, Belle, what are some of the views out there in terms of the price action in response to, you know, I guess, the final confirmation and what could lie ahead?
Yeah, well, it's pretty interesting, of course, because you said we're fairly flat today, but when you take a look at Bitcoin prices over the course of the past 12 months, you can see that rapid ascent here, more than 160% gains really coming through in the fourth quarter with that anticipation of spot Bitcoin ETFs being approved by the SEC. So the action today, yeah, fairly muted, but when you put it in that bigger context, we still have seen some pretty sizable gains. Changing on, some in the industry is saying actually, yeah, as you said, we could see a little bit of a pullback here now, given that approvals come through. Some investors might want to take some profits off the table. And then also it's about trying to attract new funds into the digital asset space as well. Hashnode is one that was spoken to, and they're saying that investors that currently have Bitcoin and other measures could be the ones that reallocate into the spot Bitcoin ETFs. It's actually going to take a little bit more time to attract new entrants into the space, Vonnie.
Well, and Annabelle, we're not exactly seeing a lot of funding flowing into crypto startups either, are we?
Yeah, that's right. PitchBook is one that puts out sort of quarterly reports on how VC funding is tracking. And the latest one tells us that we still saw it completely in the doldrums at the end of last year. So crypto VC funding was a third of the levels that we had seen in the year prior, 2022. Really interesting as well, the particular weakness in the fourth quarter, even though we did start to see that ascent coming through in Bitcoin. If you change on now, we can take a look at that chart in more detail here, really see that retreat, as I said, into the end of last year. The question is whether we start to see more coming back into the space, and a lot in the industry are optimistic, given we do have further regulatory clarity coming through. We've also got the worst of those scandals that are sort of seem to be in the rearview mirror, the likes of Sam Bankman-Fried, for instance. For now, Vonnie.
All right, Annabelle Droulers there, thank you. We'll be back with you shortly and we'll continue to monitor the price of Bitcoin and more. Plenty more to come right here on Daybreak Australia. This is Bloomberg.
Well, Taiwan heads to the polls this Saturday to pick their next president. Despite the looming leadership change, one of the largest players in the island's $1.1 trillion life insurance industry is still optimistic about business. Nanshan Life Insurance Chairman Chung Yao-yin spoke to us exclusively about the prospects he sees in the sector.
We can now offer a full range of products, and that is certainly very helpful because our customers certainly has the needs for investment-linked products. Right. So I think by offering that range of products, it will certainly help with our market share.
It's been a tough couple of years with the interest rate cycle in the United States and the hikes for particularly Taiwan insurers. What's your outlook for 2024?
I think my outlook is positive. I think I have a very positive outlook for the 2024. We believe that Fed will have to cut rates, and that would help certainly the insurance sales. Because in a higher interest rate environment, it's a lot more difficult to sell insurance product because the comparative yield they can get from other products
So what kind of premium increases can you expect in addition to the improved interest rate environment?
We don't actually have an exact number, but we're looking at a good increase.
Do you think the worst is over for this interest rate risk? I was seeing a note from Fitch earlier this month essentially saying this is still going to be the biggest risk to the Taiwan insurance industry.
Well, I wish that it's over. It's never, it's difficult to really pin down whether the situation is over, whether we can really completely get over this high interest rate environment.
There's been talk about in the past, whether it was back in 2009, but I think you also applied for an IPO in 2018, which financial regulators rejected. I think some of the ratio to equity was not, you didn't meet that requirement of 5.5%. Are you revisiting the opportunity to potentially have an IPO?
Well, capital injection is certainly the issue that we have closely looked at. Last year we have issued sub-debts, which would help capital. But certainly our goal is to go IPO. It's on our agenda. But at the moment we don't have an exact timetable for that.
Is the market looking better, though? I mean, we've seen since the end of 2022, the TAIEX is up about, 24%. And the economy seems to have a little bit of a tailwind right now. Is that your assessment right now?
Yep. I think if you look at last year, especially the fourth quarter of last year, Taiwan's export economy is doing really, really well. And the YOY growth was really exceeding everyone's expectation. So I'm looking at this year also with a positive outlook. I think that Taiwan's economy will do good.
And I know we're not talking politics today, but right now, obviously, politics is at the fore with the presidential election coming up. So I'm not going to ask you about that. But the offshoot to that question is, what kind of support from any government, whichever is going to take office, what would you like to see to help the insurance industry here?
Well, really, the elephant in the room is really IFRS 17 ICS and the new capital regime especially. And I think we, as an insurance company, the whole industry actually have some really specific history special to Taiwan. And I think the local regulator, the financial regulator really working hard with us, and they want to make sure that's a smooth transition to the new regime. And then the chairman of the FCC has made it very clear that the whole regime is for everyone's good, and then it's not to disrupt anyone's operation. So I think that was a very good, important promise that we have, and we believe that the financial regulator would really help us to transition into a new regime and to make it a more viable operation.
Nanshan Life Insurance Chairman Chung Yao-yin speaking exclusively with Bloomberg's Chief North Asia correspondent Stephen Engel in Taipei. We'll have special coverage from Taiwan all week in the lead up to the vote January 13th with the full results and analysis from Monday. Now, let's check on Asian markets before they open. It looks like it's shaping up to be a positive day for equities across Asia. We have Australia futures pointed to an open about 0.4% higher. Japan futures, too, look like the benchmarks there might open higher after a great day yesterday. And then really unchanged on the Aussie dollar and the New Zealand dollar. But we do have some movement on the yen. Once again, a lot of optimism surrounding that. And of course, before U.S. inflation data in the Thursday morning U.S. session. So right now we have the yen trading at 145.66. It's about 0.1% stronger versus the US dollar. I want to point out Bitcoin too, because I don't want to call it a rip, but we are definitely a lot higher than we were before those approvals. The coin is now trading just below $47,000. That's it for Daybreak Australia. Daybreak Asia is next.